Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 Vaccine in Overview. This is a Part 4 of the Part 7 series of Road to a Vaccine for COVID-19, brought to you by HealthyRN Ways. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine against the coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19, may be behind some of its competitors, but the company is moving forward with positive results and expects to seek emergency use authorization from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in the coming weeks. The company is working with its pharmaceutical arm Janssen to develop the vaccine under the project names Ensemble 1 and Ensemble 2. The company enrolled participants for its late stage in September, and tested its vaccine with 2 different doses. How it works: Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is being studied as a single and 2-dose adenovirus-based vaccine. It is an experimental viral vector vaccine that uses a weakened live pathogen, adenovirus, as the delivery method, vector, for transporting a recombinant vaccine for COVID-19. Recombinant vaccines use a small piece of genetic material from the virus to trigger an immune response. This genetic material for COVID-19 does not replicate in the body. A specific piece of the virus can be targeted, and recombinant vaccines are common and generally safe to use in a large population of people, even those with chronic health problems or who are immunocompromised. There can be some drawbacks to recombinant vaccines. One example is that booster shots may be required over time. Examples of recombinant vaccines are pneumococcal vaccines and vaccines for meningococcal disease. The science behind recombinant adenoviral vector vaccines has been around for a long time, but the only commercially available adenovirus-based vaccine is a rabies vaccine for animals. Adenovirus-based vaccines may also pose some problems in that the adenovirus is so common that the vaccine may not be as effective once booster doses are given, or that some people may already have immunity to the virus used in the vaccine. How effective is it? Johnson & Johnson announced that its single-dose vaccine was 66% effective at preventing moderate to severe disease from COVID-19 and 85% effective at preventing severe disease. This effectiveness in the Phase 3 trial was reached 28 days after vaccination. The efficacy against moderate to severe COVID-19 infection varied by region in the trial. It was 72% in the United States, 66% in Latin America, and 57% in South Africa. The vaccine was also found to be fully protective against hospitalization and death, and the protection against severe disease included multiple variants of COVID-19, including the B.1.351 variant found in South Africa. When will it be available? The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is still being studied in clinical trials, and the company is preparing to file for emergency use authorization from the FDA for its single-dose vaccine. If authorized, it may be made available in the coming weeks. The trial had a temporary delay in October when it paused for an unexplained illness, although no specific details were provided about what happened due to patient privacy. Regulators determined that the event was not related to the vaccine and the trial was safe to resume. The company hasn't announced a release date yet, but the company is already taking reservations for orders of the vaccine if approved. Johnson & Johnson has a contract with the US government for 100 million doses, the equivalent of $10 per dose, and the option to purchase an additional 200 million doses if the vaccine receives emergency use authorization. It is way cheaper than the others vaccine that was released recently. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, is leading vaccination efforts, and all orders of COVID-19 vaccines, regardless of the manufacturer, will go through the agency. CDC is overseeing the distribution of vaccines. CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, has made recommendations on how to prioritize vaccine supplies, but it can vary by state during distribution. Healthcare workers and people living in long-term care facilities are the first to receive the vaccines, and additional priority groups include essential workers, people aged 65 and older, and people with high-risk medical conditions. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine will be the first COVID-19 vaccine to be given in just one dose. The CDC estimated that it will take several months before the supply of vaccines catches up to the demand. Guidance on who will receive the vaccine and when will be updated as supplies become available. Although little information is available on the specifics of when everyone will receive the vaccine and where they can get it, state and local health departments will be coordinating efforts to distribute doses of the vaccines as they become available. The vaccine should be available both in physician offices and retail locations like pharmacies that administer other vaccines. How much will a COVID-19 vaccine cost? Once the vaccine is available, any doses purchased by the US government will be free to its citizens. While the vaccine itself is free, the facility or agency that offers the vaccine may charge a fee for administration. Public health programs and insurance plans are expected to reimburse patients for any costs associated with COVID-19 vaccination, but not much information has been made available yet. Who can get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Early vaccine efforts for most COVID-19 vaccine candidates are focusing on adult populations, with vaccine options for children and teens expected later in 2021. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is no exception. It's being tested in adults aged 18 and up with significant representation of individuals over age 60. There are no updates yet on other specific groups for the vaccine. Side effects and adverse events. In every clinical trial, participants are asked to record any reactions they have after receiving a medication or vaccine. Adverse reactions are considered to be medication reactions directly caused by a vaccine, whereas a side effect is a physical reaction to a medication. Initial safety information released for the vaccine shows that the most common reactions after the vaccine was administered included injection site pain, fatigue, headache, muscle aches. Additional information, including details on the prevalence and duration of side effects, is likely to be included when the final trial report is published. Funding and development. Johnson & Johnson is co-funding the development of the vaccine as part of Operation Warp Speed, a public-private partnership initiated by the US government to facilitate and accelerate the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, with funding from the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, a U.S. government program aimed at furthering the manufacture and distribution of vaccines to fight COVID-19. Johnson & Johnson said $1 billion has been invested. Early data shows Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine produces is 66% effective. The latest results from a Phase 3 clinical trial showed Johnson & Johnson's one-shot coronavirus vaccine is 66% effective against moderate to severe COVID-19. The results are reflective of the vaccine's effectiveness globally, and show levels of protection are different around the world. While the vaccine was 72% effective among participants in the US, it was only 57% effective among participants in South Africa, where a highly transmissible SARS-CoV-2 variant first emerged. Notably, nobody in the clinical trial needed to be hospitalized for COVID-19, and nobody died of the disease. While the overall effectiveness is lower than the 95% demonstrated by both Moderna and Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine brings with it two promising factors that Moderna's and Pfizer's two-dose vaccines do not have. The first being that healthcare facilities will face less logistical planning when administering a one-dose versus a two-dose vaccine. The vaccine can also be kept in the refrigerator for 3 months, as opposed to Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccines, which must be stored in a freezer up until use, making preservation challenging for some healthcare facilities. Earlier this month, results from Phase 1/2 clinical trials indicated that the company's vaccine induced immune responses against SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in both young and elderly participants. Johnson & Johnson randomly assigned healthy adults between the ages of 18 and 55 and those 65 and older to receive either a high or low dose of the vaccine, or a placebo. A select group of participants in the 18 to 55 cohort received a second dose of the vaccine. In total, the trial included 805 participants. Most of the volunteers produced detectable neutralizing antibodies, which researchers believe play an important role in defending cells against the virus, after 28 days, according to the trial data. By day 57, all volunteers had detectable antibodies, regardless of vaccine dose or age group, and remained stable for at least 71 days in the 18 to 55 age group. The company is working with its pharmaceutical arm, Janssen, to develop the vaccine. What is an immune response? Developing an immune response is a necessary step in the process of creating vaccines. When it is introduced to a new virus, the immune system will respond by employing a number of germ-fighting tools needed to get over the infection. After the infection clears up, the immune system will remember what it learned about how to protect the body against that disease, and employ that against any future infections. Your immune system protects you against disease. When the immune system, composed of various organs, recognizes a particular germ, e.g. bacteria, viruses, as foreign, it launches antibodies that help destroy the germ. This process is referred to as B-cell immunity. T-cell immunity, on the other hand, occurs when the immune system remembers a particular germ and destroys it before it can make you sick again. Vaccines operate similarly, except they are designed to imitate an infection, meaning the immune system remembers and protects without a person becoming ill in order to do so. Minor symptoms may occur as a result of a vaccine. Johnson & Johnson's early results. In October, Johnson & Johnson announced early results showing that a single dose of their vaccine could induce antibodies in 97% of study participants that effectively neutralized the virus in the laboratory, but the company still required additional information on the effectiveness of the vaccine. They experienced a setback in their trials when a participant experienced an unexplained illness. No specific details were provided about what happened due to patient privacy. Regulators determined on October 23 the event was not related to the vaccine and the trial was safe to resume. Evaluating safety, participants in all three groups, high dose, low dose, and placebo, of the clinical trials reported mild symptoms, including headache, fatigue, nausea, myalgia, muscle pain, pain at the injection site. Adverse reactions were less common in the older age group. In the case of the participants who received the two-dose regimen, fewer reactions occurred after the second dose. 5 participants experienced more serious symptoms, with one participant visiting the hospital for a fever associated with vaccination. The participant recovered within 12 hours. The remaining 4 cases were confirmed to be unrelated to the vaccine. Next steps. Johnson & Johnson is on target to deliver 1 billion doses of its vaccine by the end of this year. The company receives an emergency use authorization, EUA, from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. It is still too early to say specifically how many doses would be available in March. Before moving forward with an EUA, the FDA requires a follow-up of at least 2 months of safety data on half of the study participants, a threshold Johnson & Johnson crossed earlier this month. If the single-dose vaccine is shown to be safe and effective, the company expects to submit an application for emergency use authorization with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration shortly afterward, with other regulatory applications around the world to be made subsequently. We are aiming for 1 billion doses in 2021. If it is a single dose, that means 1 billion people. But it will be in a ramp-up throughout the year. It's a few weeks too early to be giving final numbers on what we can launch in the first couple months. How the Johnson & Johnson vaccine works. Johnson & Johnson is testing a coronavirus vaccine known as JNJ-78436735 or AD26, CoV-2s. Clinical trials showed that a single dose of the vaccine had an efficacy rate of up to 72%. Janssen Pharmaceutica, a Belgium-based division of Johnson & Johnson, is developing the vaccine in collaboration with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. A piece of the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is studded with proteins that it uses to enter human cells. These so-called spike proteins make a tempting target for potential vaccines and treatments. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is based on the virus's genetic instructions for building the spike protein. But unlike the Pfizer BioNTech and Moderna vaccines, which store the instructions in single-stranded RNA, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses double-stranded DNA. DNA inside an adenovirus. The researchers added the gene for the coronavirus spike protein to another virus called adenovirus 26. Adenoviruses are common viruses that typically cause colds or flu-like symptoms. The Johnson & Johnson team used a modified adenovirus that can enter cells but can't replicate inside them or cause illness. Vaccine comes out of decades of research on adenovirus-based vaccines. In July, the first one was approved for general use, a vaccine for Ebola, also made by Johnson & Johnson. The company is also running trials on adenovirus-based vaccines for other diseases, including HIV and Zika. Some other coronavirus vaccines are also based on adenoviruses, such as the one developed by the University of Oxford and AstraZeneca using a chimpanzee adenovirus. Adenovirus-based vaccines for COVID-19 are more rugged than mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. DNA is not as fragile as RNA, and the adenovirus's tough protein coat helps protect the genetic material inside. As a result, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine can be refrigerated for up to 3 months at 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Entering a cell, after the vaccine is injected into a person's arm, the adenoviruses bump into cells and latch onto proteins on their surface. The cell engulfs the virus in a bubble and pulls it inside. Once inside, the adenovirus escapes from the bubble and travels to the nucleus, the chamber where the cell's DNA is stored. The adenovirus pushes its DNA into the nucleus. The adenovirus is engineered so it can't make copies of itself, but the gene for the coronavirus spike protein can be read by the cell and copied into a molecule called messenger RNA, or mRNA. Building spike proteins. The mRNA leaves the nucleus, and the cell's molecules read its sequence and begin assembling spike proteins. Some of the spike proteins produced by the cell form spikes that migrate to its surface and stick out their tips. The vaccinated cells also break up some of the proteins into fragments, which they present on their surface. These protruding spikes and spike protein fragments can then be recognized by the immune system. The adenovirus also provokes the immune system by switching on the cell's alarm systems. The cell sends out warning signals to activate immune cells nearby. By raising this alarm, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine causes the immune system to react more strongly to the spike proteins. When a vaccinated cell dies, the debris contains spike proteins and protein fragments that can then be taken up by a type of immune cell called an antigen-presenting cell. The cell presents fragments of the spike protein on its surface. When other cells called helper T cells detect these fragments, the helper T cells can raise the alarm and help marshal other immune cells to fight the infection. Making antibodies, other immune cells, called B cells, may bump into the coronavirus spikes on the surface of vaccinated cells, or free-floating spike protein fragments. A few of the B cells may be able to lock onto the spike proteins. If these B cells are then activated by helper T cells, they will start to proliferate and pour out antibodies that target the spike protein. Stopping the virus, the antibodies can latch onto coronavirus spikes, mark the virus for destruction and prevent infection by blocking the spikes from attaching to other cells. Killing infected cells, the antigen-presenting cells can also activate another type of immune cell called a killer T cell to seek out and destroy any coronavirus-infected cells that display the spike protein fragments on their surfaces. Remembering the virus, Johnson & Johnson is testing a single dose of the vaccine, unlike the 2-dose coronavirus vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna and AstraZeneca. But because Johnson & Johnson's Phase 3 trial results have not yet been released, researchers don't know how well the vaccine might work, or how long its protection might last. If the vaccine is effective, it's possible that the number of antibodies and killer T cells will drop in the months after vaccination. But the immune system also contains special cells called memory B cells and memory T cells that might retain information about the coronavirus for years or even decades. Vaccine timeline: January 2020 Johnson & Johnson begins work on a coronavirus vaccine. March Johnson & Johnson receives $456 million from the United States government to help develop and produce the vaccine. July a Phase 1 trial begins. Unlike the clinical trials for other leading vaccines, The trial involves one dose, not two. A dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. August, the federal government agrees to pay Johnson & Johnson $1 billion for 100 million doses, if the vaccine is approved. September, Johnson & Johnson launches a Phase 3 trial. October 8, 2020, the European Union reaches a deal to obtain 200 million doses. October 12, 2020, the company pauses its Phase 3 trial to investigate an adverse reaction in a volunteer. October 23, 2020, the trial resumes. November 16, 2020, Johnson & Johnson announces a second Phase 3 trial to observe the effects of 2 doses of their vaccine, instead of just one. December 17, 2020, Johnson & Johnson announces its Phase 3 trial is fully enrolled, with around 45,000 participants. January 2021, preliminary results from the Phase 3 trial are expected in January. The company is aiming to produce at least 1 billion doses this year. January 13, 2021, Johnson & Johnson expects to release trial results in as little as 2 weeks. But the company is falling behind on its original production schedule. February 2021, if trials show the vaccine is effective, the company could apply for emergency use authorization from the Food and Drug Administration in February. Johnson & Johnson is seeking FDA authorization for its vaccine. Johnson & Johnson has applied for emergency use authorization from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for its single-dose COVID-19 vaccine. Upon authorization of our investigational COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use, we are ready to begin shipping. With our submission to the FDA and our ongoing reviews with other health authorities around the world, we are working with great urgency to make our investigational vaccine available to the public as quickly as possible. The FDA is now scheduled to meet February 26, 2021 for an all-day meeting to discuss the vaccine candidate. The agency is expected to issue authorization within days of that meeting. Johnson & Johnson revealed Phase 3 trial data on January 29, indicating that its vaccine was 66% effective overall at preventing moderate to severe COVID-19, 28 days after inoculation. Key takeaways: Johnson & Johnson's one-shot coronavirus vaccine produced an immune response against COVID-19 in clinical trials. Clinical trials say the vaccine is 66% effective at preventing moderate to severe disease 28 days after vaccination, and 72% effective in the U.S. The one-shot vaccine would be an asset to the current U.S. vaccination process, which currently requires logistical planning for vaccines that require 2 doses. If the company's vaccine is authorized by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, it would be the 3rd vaccine approved for use in the U.S. This is the Part 4 of Series 7 of Road to Vaccine of COVID-19. Please watch the Part 1, 2, 3 series on my previous videos, an overview of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Today's video is a Part 1 series of 7 series company that makes the COVID-19 vaccines. Pfizer's joint effort with BioNTech was the first vaccine approved in the U.S. Pfizer's BNT162b2 mRNA COVID-19 vaccine was the first vaccine against the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, approved for distribution in the United States. The approval came as an emergency use authorization on December 11 after clinical trials showed the vaccine is 95% effective in preventing COVID-19. Pfizer and the German immunotherapy company BioNTech began working together on the COVID-19 vaccine in March. The two companies began investigating mRNA vaccines together in 2018 to fight influenza. Clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccine began in April 2020, and promising results from those trials led the companies to seek an emergency use authorization from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in November. When was Pfizer's vaccine officially approved? Pfizer's vaccine approval was granted on December 11. Almost immediately after, Pfizer began shipping doses of the vaccine. How it works: the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, similar to the one developed by Moderna. The technology behind these vaccines has been around for about 3 decades and has shown promise in preventing notoriously difficult to prevent diseases like influenza and cancer. Unlike conventional vaccines that use inactivated or live viruses, mRNA vaccines contain no parts of the virus they fight. An mRNA, ribonucleic acid, vaccine is a single-stranded molecule that complements a strand of your DNA. These strands have a special coating that can protect mRNA from chemicals in the body that can break it down and help it enter cells. Rather than exposing the body to a small amount of virus to create an immune response, mRNA causes the vaccine recipient to make the protein of interest. This includes helping the cell make part of the spiked protein that makes COVID-19 so potent, teaching immune cells to recognize and fight similar spiked proteins. How was Pfizer's vaccine tested? The clinical trial investigated how well two 30 microgram doses given 21 days apart worked in preventing COVID-19. More than 40,000 people participated in the clinical trial between July and November 2020, half receiving the vaccine and the other half a placebo. How effective is it? The Pfizer vaccine has performed very well in clinical trials. The effective rate of the vaccine was 52% between the first and second dose of the vaccine, 91% a week after the second dose, and 95% effective beyond that. According to the clinical trial report, out of the 10 severe COVID-19 cases noted in the study population, only 1 had received the vaccine, and 9 had received the placebo. How to get it? Pfizer, BioNTech were ready to start vaccinations just days after receiving a December 11 emergency use authorization, with the first doses given December 14. Initial supplies of the vaccination are expected to be tight, but officials with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimated there will be enough doses to vaccinate 20 million Americans by the end of the year, another 50 million by January, and 100 million total by spring 2021. The CDC is leading vaccination efforts, and all orders of the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer, or any other manufacturer, will go through the agency. CDC is overseeing the distribution of vaccines. Healthcare workers and people living in long-term care facilities will be the first to receive the first of the vaccines, which will be limited at first as manufacturing ramps up. According to the CDC, there are more than 21 million healthcare providers in the US, and about 3 million Americans living in long-term care facilities. Each of these people would need to receive 2 doses of the top vaccine contenders so far, totaling nearly 50 million doses needed for the initial phase of vaccination alone. The CDC estimates it will take several months before the supply of vaccines catches up to the demand. Guidance on who will receive the vaccine and when will be decided as supplies become available. How many vaccine doses does America need? The US alone has a population of about 330 million, meaning nearly 700 million vaccine doses will be needed to vaccinate all of America if other vaccines follow a 2-vaccine dose. Although little information is available yet on the specifics of when everyone will receive the vaccination, and where they can get it, state and local health departments will be coordinating efforts to distribute doses of the vaccines as they become available. The vaccine should be available both in physician offices and retail locations like pharmacies that administer other vaccines. For now, the availability of the vaccine is somewhat limited due to its cold storage demands. The Pfizer, BioNTech vaccine has to be kept at around -70 degrees Celsius. A version of the vaccine that can be kept at standard refrigeration temperatures is expected to be developed later. The current formulation of the vaccine can be stored for 5 days in standard refrigeration temperatures immediately before administration. Once the vaccine is available, any doses purchased by the US government will be free to its citizens. While the vaccine itself is free, the facility or agency that offers the vaccine may charge a fee for administration. Public health programs and insurance plans are expected to reimburse patients for any costs associated with COVID-19 vaccination, but not much information has been made available yet. Who can get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine? The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine has been given emergency use authorization for people aged 16 and up. Safety information isn't available yet for children under age 16. pregnant women, and people who are immunocompromised. Additional data is expected in the coming months as additional trials are completed. Side effects and adverse events. Patients who were enrolled in the clinical trial were asked to keep a record of any local or systemic reactions after each dose of the vaccine. Mild to moderate pain at the site of injection was the most common complaint, with less than 1% of the trial group reporting severe pain. Most of the local reactions reported went away on their own in 1 to 2 days. Systemic effects, or reactions that affect the entire body, were more common in participants aged 16 to 55 than in participants who were older than 55. The most common effects were tiredness and headache. Less than 20% of the people who were vaccinated report a fever after the second dose. There were a few serious adverse reactions during the trial: one shoulder injury from the vaccination administration, inflammation of lymph nodes, cardiac arrhythmia, and limb pain or tingling. 2 participants died, one from arterial disease and another from cardiac arrest, but researchers did not attribute either of these deaths to the vaccine itself. Another 4 people in the trial died, but they had received the placebo, not the vaccine. 1. What are adverse reactions? Adverse reactions are considered to be medically significant, adverse events caused by a vaccine, whereas a side effect is more common and mild reaction. Pfizer, BioNTech will continue safety monitoring for another 2 years on the initial trial group to watch for any additional reactions. Funding and development. Pfizer, BioNTech worked together on the vaccine with the help of $1.95 billion in funding from the U.S. government as part of Operation Warp Speed and the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, a U.S. government program aimed at furthering the manufacture and distribution of vaccines to fight COVID-19. According to Pfizer, the funds pay for the vaccine doses but were not used towards the research and development of the vaccine. The funding agreement entitles the U.S. government to the first 100 million vaccine doses the company produces, plus an option to purchase 500 million more doses after that, to produce more vaccine for the rest of the world. More videos on the following vaccine makers on trial now, like Moderna, AstraZeneca, Oxford, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax, Merck, Sanofi, GSK. Moderna COVID-19 vaccine in overview. This is part 2 series of the 7-part series for coronavirus vaccine manufacturers. You can watch the part 1 series on the description below. Brought to you by HealthyRN Ways. Please like, Sarah, and subscribe to my channel to see through whole 7 parts. Posting of the rest of videos every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Moderna's vaccine is the second to receive US approval. As cases of novel coronavirus, COVID-19, rise in a predicted winter surge, a number of vaccines are in the pipeline to help bring an end to the pandemic. One of these is Moderna's vaccine, called mRNA-1273. Moderna's vaccine is the second vaccine to receive emergency use authorization from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA. Moderna, an American biotechnology company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, began developing its vaccine in January 2020. The company worked with the National Institutes of Health, NIH, to finalize gene sequencing for the virus and began working on developing the vaccine soon after. The first batch of the vaccine was developed in early February, just 25 days after the gene was sequenced. The first dose of the vaccine was given by March 2020 in a phase 1 clinical trial, and those early trials showed promising results. By mid-year, Moderna received funding and fast-track regulatory allowances to help move development along. While a vaccine initially wasn't expected for 18 months or more, the new developments meant Moderna could deliver millions of doses much sooner. In August 2020, the US government ordered 100 million doses of the vaccine, even though it hadn't even been approved for use yet, and in November, results of the Phase 1 clinical trial were published. 2. In December, results from Phase 3 clinical trials were published and the US ordered an additional 100 million doses. When was Moderna's vaccine officially approved? American health officials granted Moderna's vaccine an emergency use authorization on December 18 for adults 18 and older, making it the second vaccine to receive the designation from U.S. health officials in 1 week. How it works: the Moderna vaccine is an mRNA vaccine, similar to the one developed by Pfizer. The technology behind these vaccines has been around for about 3 decades and shown promise in preventing notoriously difficult-to-prevent diseases, even cancer. Unlike conventional vaccines that use inactivated or live viruses, mRNA vaccines are non-infectious and contain no parts of the virus they fight. This makes mRNA vaccines safer for certain populations. An mRNA, messenger ribonucleic acid, vaccine is a single-stranded molecule that complements a strand of your DNA. These strands have a special coating that can protect mRNA from chemicals in the body that can break it down, and help it enter muscle cells. Rather than exposing the body to a small amount of virus to create an immune response, mRNA causes the vaccine recipient to make the protein of interest. This includes helping the cell make part of the spiked protein that makes COVID-19 so potent, teaching immune cells to recognize and fight similar spiked proteins. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, mRNA vaccines teach our cells how to make a protein, or even just a piece of a protein. This triggers an immune response. Moderna's vaccine was initially tested in adults aged 18 to 55. The Phase 1 trial investigated 3 different doses, 25, 100, and 250 micrograms, given twice, 28 days apart. By the Phase 3 trial, Moderna zeroed in on a 2-dose formula of 100 micrograms each, given in 2 doses about 4 weeks apart. How was Moderna's vaccine tested? Moderna's Phase 3 trial tested a 2-dose vaccine, 100 micrograms each, given 28 days apart, in adults ages 18 and older. The trial had more than 30,000 participants, including about 7,500 adults ages 65 and older and more than 5,000 adults ages 18 to 64 with risk factors for severe illness from COVID-19. How effective is it? Researchers that conducted the trials were able to test how effective the vaccine is in creating antibodies and neutralizing responses with tests that use bodily fluids like blood or urine to see whether antibodies to a particular virus can be found. These tests include ELISA, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay test, PSVNA, pseudotype lentivirus reporter single round of infection neutralization assay, PRNT, plaque reduction neutralization test. Antibody levels from these tests were compared to those found in people who had recovered from COVID-19 infections. The study investigated responses by other immune cells, like T cells. After the first round of vaccinations in the 100 microgram and 250 microgram formulas in the Phase 1 trial, antibody responses were similar to the median level of immunity in those who had recovered from and had natural immunity after a COVID-19 infection. Other immunity tests, like the PSVNA, showed little response after the first dose. However, after the second doses, antibody and other immune responses were strong among the vaccination group, reaching levels that were close to those with the highest immune responses in those who had recovered from COVID-19. Immune responses developed within about 2 weeks of the first dose, according to the trial report, but were much stronger after the second dose. Exactly how effective is it? Moderna's vaccine has been shown in trials to be very effective, preventing COVID-19 in 94.1% of the people enrolled in the Phase 3 clinical trial. Additionally, the vaccine seems to have broad efficacy, with success rates consistent across various age, race, ethnicity, and gender groups. The lifespan of these vaccines isn't clear yet, but the leaders of the trial say they will keep collecting blood samples from the study group to check for immunity throughout the first year after vaccination. In the past, viruses in the same virus families don't generate long-lived immune responses, the trial report notes. When will it be available? Moderna received emergency use authorization from the FDA for its vaccine on December 18. Distribution may be a bit easier for Moderna than Pfizer since its vaccine can be stored at standard refrigerator temperatures for 30 days, or frozen at about -20 degrees Celsius for 6 months. The Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at much colder temperatures. As far as cost goes, Moderna announced during an internal conference call in August that the vaccine could cost between $32 and $37 per dose, but final prices may change when the worst of the pandemic has passed. According to the CDC, doses of the vaccines that have been purchased by the US government will be available to citizens free of charge. In addition to the 200 million doses already ordered by the US government, it has the option to purchase 300 million more. As of January 26, Moderna had supplied 30.4 million doses to the US and 10.1 of these doses had been administered. Moderna also announced that it is on track to deliver 100 million doses to the US by the end of March and the additional 100 million doses by the end of June. The company has also reached agreements to supply the vaccine to several other countries, including European Union, 80 million initial doses with an option for another 80 million doses, Japan, 50 million doses, Canada, 40 million doses with an option for an additional 16 million, Switzerland, 7.5 million doses, United Kingdom, 7 million doses, Israel, 6 million doses. A number of other countries have also placed orders with the company, but the number of doses ordered was not disclosed. While the vaccine itself will be free if purchased by the government, there could be fees charged by vaccine providers who administer the vaccine. Reimbursement programs for these administrative costs should be available through both public and private insurance plans, as well as through the Health Resources and Services Administration's Provider Relief Fund for people with no public or private health insurance. Who can get the Moderna vaccine? Now that vaccines are on the way, the question becomes who will get them and when. The CDC anticipated limited supplies in the initial phase of the vaccination program, and recommendations for who should receive the vaccine first were made by CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, in December 2020 based on earlier guidance from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. In terms of the order, federal health officials decided that healthcare workers and people living in long-term care facilities should be the first to receive the first of the vaccines, which have been limited at first as manufacturing ramps up. According to the CDC, there are more than 18 million healthcare providers in the US, and about 1.3 million Americans living in long-term care facilities. Each of these people would need to receive 2 doses of the top vaccine contenders so far, totaling nearly 40 million doses needed for the initial phase of vaccination. The CDC estimates it will take several months before the supply of vaccines catches up to the demand. Guidance on who will receive the vaccine and when will be decided as supplies become available. The US alone has a population of about 330 million, meaning nearly 700 million vaccine doses will be needed to vaccinate all of America as other vaccines follow a 2-vaccine dose. Although little information is available yet on the specifics of when everyone will receive the vaccination, and where they can get it, state and local health departments will be coordinating efforts to distribute doses of the vaccines as they become available. The vaccine should be available both in physician offices and retail locations like pharmacies that administer other vaccines. The Moderna vaccine is given in 2 doses that are 28 days apart. The CDC recommends that the second dose be given as close as possible to the 28 days, yet grants a 4-day grace period when it can be given slightly earlier and allows the second dose to be given within 42 days of the first dose in cases where the 28-day window isn't feasible. When will children be able to get the vaccine? Children will not receive the vaccine at first, as trials have only been conducted in adults. Moderna began recruiting participants for a clinical trial in 12 to 17-year-olds in December. Trials for younger children are still in the planning stages. Children and teens may be able to receive the vaccine later in 2021. Side effects and adverse events. People who took part in the study were asked to record any reactions to the vaccine, either to the area where the vaccine was injected or that they experienced overall. Pain at the site where the vaccine was injected and overall tiredness were the most common side effects in the Phase 3 trial. Systemic effects are reactions that affect the entire body, and headache and fatigue topped that list and were most common in the vaccine group. Less than 20% of the people who were vaccinated report a fever after the second dose. Local effects, on the other hand, affect only a small, limited area. The most common effect in this category was pain at the injection site. The severity of reactions increased with the second dose of the vaccine. Few reactions were rated as severe with the first dose of the vaccine, but several were rated as severe after the second dose. The most common reactions reported by participants after the second dose of the vaccine were pain at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle aches, chills, joint pain, nausea or vomiting, fever, red or swollen areas at the injection site, and swollen or enlarged lymph nodes were also reported. The percentage of serious adverse reactions was the same for the placebo and vaccine groups, 0.6%, and did not indicate any safety concerns. There was also no evidence of vaccine-associated enhanced respiratory disease in the trials. Previous vaccines for coronavirus in veterinary use and animal models have led to respiratory problems related to vaccination. More observation will be done on the study groups as time goes on, and more studies are planned on special populations, like children, people with chronic illnesses, pregnant and other related disease. Funding and development. Moderna worked with the National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to develop its vaccine. The company received about $1.6 billion in federal funding through the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA, a U.S. government program working to speed up the manufacture and distribution of vaccines to fight COVID-19. The U.S. government exercised its option for an additional 100 million doses from Moderna for around $1.68 billion. How to know about AstraZeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine in overview. This video is part 4 of 7-part series of Road to Vaccine Manufacture. To watch the other 3-part, click on the link below. This video is brought to you by HealthyRN Ways. While some vaccine makers are using new approaches to fight the coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19, others are turning to more established methods to end the pandemic. AstraZeneca and Oxford University have been working on an adenovirus-based vaccine, ChAdOx1nCoV19, AZD1222. The vaccine is a viral vector vaccine that uses a modified adenovirus, the virus that causes the common cold, that contains genetic material from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The vaccine was developed quickly since this vaccine technology has been around for decades. Oxford had been studying adenovirus-based vaccines for a number of other diseases like the Zika virus when COVID-19 emerged. Researchers adapted a weakened chimpanzee adenovirus to develop the vaccine, and a phase 1 trial began in April 2020, with more than 1,000 vaccinations given in the United Kingdom. Initial phase 3 trial results were published in early December and investigated how well the vaccine worked in more than 11,000 of the nearly 24,000 people over the age of 18 enrolled across 4 trial groups in the United Kingdom, Brazil, and South Africa. There has been some controversy surrounding this vaccine, with dosing discrepancies in some study groups, and a move by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, to pause the U.S. trial because of unexplained illness. The FDA restarted the trial after reviewing the safety data. There are not any hearings scheduled yet on an emergency use authorization by the FDA, and the U.S. clinical trial is scheduled to last until September 2021. How it works. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is a recombinant adenoviral vector vaccine. Recombinant vaccines use a small piece of genetic material from a pathogen, like SARS-CoV-2, to trigger an immune response. A specific piece of the virus can be targeted, and recombinant vaccines are generally safe to use in a large population of people, even those with chronic health problems or people who are immunocompromised. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is a recombinant adenovirus vaccine that uses a weakened live pathogen. One drawback of recombinant adenoviral vector vaccines is that booster shots may be required over time. Examples of similar types of recombinant vaccines, that do not use live pathogens, are pneumococcal vaccines and vaccines for meningococcal disease. While recombinant vaccines are common, The only commercially available adenovirus-based vaccine of this type is a rabies vaccine for animals. Adenovirus vaccines can pose some problems in that the adenovirus is so common that the vaccine may not be as effective once booster doses are given, or that some people may already have immunity to the virus used in the vaccine. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine was tested using 2 doses given about a month apart. The dosing used in the trials is unclear, with different accounts of the dosing changes first uncovered by Reuters news service. Reporters with the news agency were given 2 different answers by AstraZeneca and Oxford about whether a subgroup in the UK arm of the study received half doses of the vaccine purposefully or by accident. The discrepancy was uncovered after preliminary results were published. How effective is it? Whether by accident or on purpose, the dosing change appears to have been lucky. According to the trial report, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is about 70% effective on average. This average was calculated after a 62% effective rate was observed in people who received the full vaccine dose compared with 90% effective in those who received the half dose. Additional reviews are ongoing, and it remains unclear at this time why a half dose of vaccine might have worked better than a full second dose. When will it be available? If and when the vaccine will be available is a big question. AstraZeneca had prepared distribution information when preliminary results were released, but arguments over whether the half-dosing of the vaccine was intentional and a pause in the trial over safety concerns may have slowed progress on the vaccine. The company said trials are still underway around the world, but that, pending regulatory approval, as many as 3 billion doses could be available in 2021. A number of countries have already ordered doses of the vaccine and authorized it for emergency use. Once available, the vaccine may be able to be more easily distributed than some other options. Rather than extremely cold temperatures like some other vaccine options, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine will require only standard refrigeration, and is estimated to cost around $3 to $4 per dose. The cheapest among the other vaccines manufacturers. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, is leading vaccination efforts, and all orders of the COVID-19 vaccine, regardless of the manufacturer, will go through the agency. CDC is overseeing the distribution of vaccines, too. CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, has made recommendations on how to prioritize vaccine supplies. Healthcare workers and people living in long-term care facilities were the first priority groups to receive authorized COVID-19 vaccines. State and local health departments are coordinating efforts to distribute doses of the vaccines as they become available. The vaccine should be available both in physician offices and retail locations like pharmacies that administer other vaccines. Who can get the AstraZeneca vaccine? The initial clinical trial for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine focused on people aged 18 to 55, and new trials with people older than 55 began in August. There had been trials involving children, but that group was removed from trial data in mid-December. AstraZeneca and Oxford have not made any statements on the change. Side effects and adverse events. Generally, side effects of COVID-19 vaccines have included arm pain, swelling, and redness where the vaccine was injected. There have been a few other adverse effects reported, though, including one that resulted in a pause in the clinical trial. Adverse reactions are considered to be medication reactions directly caused by a vaccine, whereas a side effect is a physical reaction to a medication. The preliminary report on the vaccine published in The Lancet revealed generally good results in terms of side effects, but there were a few concerning adverse reactions. There were 3 cases of transverse myelitis, a condition where there is inflammation of the spinal cord, in people who received the vaccine. These illnesses were determined to be unlikely to have been caused by the vaccine. A number of deaths were also reported in the study, most in the control group, but those deaths were unrelated to the vaccine and were due to incidents like traffic accident and homicide. Funding and development. The vaccine was developed through a partnership between Oxford and AstraZeneca. Funding support for the study was also provided by United Kingdom Research and Innovation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the NIHR Oxford Biomedical Research Centre, and the Thames Valley and South Midlands NIHR Clinical Research Network. What you need to know about the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine trial pause. Pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca paused late-stage human clinical trials of COVID-19 vaccines around the world on September 9 after a participant in the UK became ill. The patient may have developed spinal cord inflammation called transverse myelitis, but details have not been officially released. It is unknown whether the person who became ill received the vaccine or a placebo. They received the vaccine. A committee of independent experts commissioned by AstraZeneca is reviewing safety data surrounding the event, which is protocol for large clinical trials when an unexpected or unexplained illness occurs in a participant. We will be guided by this committee as to when the trials could restart, so that we can continue our work at the earliest opportunity to provide this vaccine broadly, equitably, and at no profit during this pandemic. What this means for you: although clinical trials are on hold, they are not terminated. Hope is not lost that a COVID-19 vaccine will become available in the future. Researchers from 9 pharmaceutical companies are working together and following protocols to ensure that a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine will ultimately be approved, manufactured, and available to the public. What does a pause mean? The pause in the Phase 3 clinical trials does not mean that there will never be a vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, and that we'll never be able to leave our homes. The pause ensures that a standard review process is taking place to safeguard the integrity of all 9 of the Phase 3 clinical trials currently underway for a COVID-19 vaccine. During clinical trials, mild side effects are expected, such as pain at the injection site, headache, and fatigue. Each of these side effects can be a sign that the immune system is responding and creating antibodies. But symptoms like headache and fatigue occur with many illnesses, and may be coincidental occurrences in people participating in clinical trials. Those mild side effects are not cause for alarm. When unexpected side effects or more serious illness occurs in a Phase 3 participant, scientists temporarily pause a clinical trial until they investigate the situation. While the AstraZeneca trial is paused, 8 other companies are in the middle of Phase 3 clinical trials: coronavirus vaccine tracker, BioNTech, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Moderna, Novavax, Pfizer, Sanofi. What is the process for developing a new vaccine? The process for creating a new vaccine involves 6 stages, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. The first 2 stages involve exploration and a preclinical stage, during which scientists do lab work and begin studying the effects of a newly created vaccine on cells and animals. The third stage is clinical development, which has 3 phases. 1. Phase 1. During a Phase 1 study, scientists try to determine the strongest vaccine dose that causes the fewest side effects. This helps determine the proper dose to administer to people. A few dozen people participate in Phase 1 studies. 2. Phase 2. In a Phase 2 study, the vaccine is tested among hundreds of people who have similar characteristics, such as age, gender, and medical conditions, to determine how effective the vaccine is in certain types of people. If Phase 2 studies are successful, people will produce antibodies, and the clinical trial moves into Phase 3. 3. Phase 3. The purpose of Phase 3 clinical trials is to evaluate safety of a vaccine. Thousands of people participate in Phase 3 trials, and scientists continue to monitor the effectiveness of the vaccine, as well as side effects that people experience. Next steps: once Phase 3 clinical trials restart, they will continue until there is enough evidence of vaccine safety and effectiveness. Then, the 4th step in the vaccine development process can take place. The vaccine goes to the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for regulatory review and approval. When the vaccine receives approval, the 5th step can proceed. The vaccine starts to be manufactured and distributed. Testing doesn't end there. Quality control tests are performed throughout the manufacturing process, and manufacturing facilities are inspected by the FDA. Studies to monitor side effects, also called adverse events, in vaccinated people take place after the vaccine is approved, licensed, and administered to the public. For now, we wait as AstraZeneca's committee of independent experts do their review. We continue to wash our hands, wear our masks, and stay 6 feet apart to do what we can to prevent or slow the spread of SARS-CoV-2. There are several variations of COVID-19 vaccines in Phase 3 testing, but all of them need to transmit a tiny bit of the SARS-CoV-2 virus into your body. The tiny bit of genetic material is not enough to make you sick, but just enough so your immune system can recognize it as foreign material and create antibodies against it. That response primes your immune system so that if you come into contact with SARS-CoV-2 in the future, your body can attack it right away, preventing a full-blown illness. The world is watching and waiting for a COVID-19 vaccine, so hearing there is a pause may be disheartening. The good news is that it means researchers are following the scientific process rather than succumbing to political pressure to quickly produce a vaccine. By the time this video uploaded, other vaccine manufacturers have release in the USA and around the world, as people are in dire need it. Have you had your shot? Which vaccine will you get? Put your comment below. This is the part 4 of Series 7 of Race to COVID-19 Vaccine. Please watch the part 1, 2, 3 series on my previous videos. Like, share and subscribe to my channels for more videos on coronavirus. Thank you for watching. See you on my next video. Ma salama.